Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back to day 4 of our week-long Wavefront training. I hope it's been useful for everybody. I really appreciate all the time. I know it's been a long week with a lot of different sessions and a lot of different things to take in. What we're going to be covering today is the real sort of monitoring aspects of Wavefront, specifically how you do alerting and how you do events. Good news around alerting, though, and I may have mentioned this on day 1, alerting and querying and visualizing your data in Wavefront are, for the most part, really the same thing. They're both driven by the query language. So all of what you've been doing to learn about the query language just lends itself directly into alerting. You don't have to completely different topics to understand. Of course, alerting does have a few of its own nuances, but for the most part, if you learn the query language, you already pretty much know how alerting works. I did just want to check if there were any questions from yesterday, and if not, I had a couple of things that I wanted to show that I realized I've forgotten to mention. One is, so a user reached out yesterday, I think it was John Volan, to ask for all the links that I had used, which hopefully you got those, John. I put them into the Slack channel yesterday. And as I was going through it and sort of reviewing my own links and my own notes, I realized there was one thing from day 2, which that I intended to mention and just make clear, but I don't think I did. It was related to this link, which is about looking at counter data and taking the rate of it and so on. There's just a little idiom here around the ordering in which you want to do this that I just wanted to make clear, because I've seen users trip up on this a number of times. And it's simple once you remember it. The idea here is that we're seeing counters from a bunch of different things that are going up over time. Very often you're going to want to see the total of these things, like what's the total per second rate from all this stuff. The only thing you need to remember is always take the rate first and then take the sum. And that will give you the correct answer. And you do that ordering instead of sum rate. So dead simple, but I have seen people swap these before, and it can lead to issues. In fact, you will even see when you do something like this, you'll see a little warning that, hey, you may be doing something that you don't want to do. The general idea is if you're going to take the rate of data, it's always going to be right next to the TS expression. The reason why, if you're interested, is in this case, these counters are not resetting. So actually, in this case, the ordering would not matter because these are just all going up over time. But say that some of these systems were restarting, and say that they were restarting not aligned with each other. So, you know, they're restarting at different times.
Yeah.
You could imagine then if you sum all these up, you may no longer have a monotonically increasing counter. You might have like a gauge that's just jumping up and down. And if you take the rate of that, it's somewhat meaningless. So it could give you incorrect answers. So just a little tip there. If you just do sum rate, you'll get the right answer. And the one other thing simple little thing that I forgot to mention, when we were looking at dashboard variables yesterday, we did discuss how you use the variables within your queries to drive them. I just forgot to mention it, but it's pretty useful. You can also embed those things in like the title of your chart and so on. So as well as modifying the queries, you can see if I change from like prod to development, it changed both the actual title of this section that we're looking at, as well as the title of the chart. So you can use these variables to drive querying, but also kind of metadata around the dashboard that you're looking at. All right, let's get on to alerting then. A bit like I did yesterday with the dashboard content, there's some slides in here that are just really here for reference. I'll be looking at this stuff directly in the UI. One thing that I wanted to mention before getting into the user interface itself is that, and we will see this in there, but there are two different kinds of alerts that you can do in Wavefront. There's what we've called classic. I don't know if that's a great name, but really just because that's the way we always had alerting. In a classic alert, you put a condition on your query, you know, in a simple case, something like TS memory greater than 50 gigs. So we don't want the memory to go above that. That means that you have kind of one threshold that drives one alert, and you define whether that alert be a warning kind of alert, a severe alert. If we did have cases where customers wanted to have different thresholds, so for example, if the thing goes above 30, I want to send a message into a Slack channel just for visibility. If it goes above 50, though, I actually want to page someone because that's a critical, a warning type of threshold versus a severe type of threshold. And in order to support those, we introduced the threshold type. And I think a lot of times going forward, and I've certainly seen this with newer customers since we introduced the threshold type, that they very often will go for that, and it makes a lot of sense. The reason why we left the classic type in place is kind of twofold. One, just backwards compatibility. We have lots of customers with lots of alerts. In fact, we have one customer that I think has something on the order of 50,000 alerts, which is a pretty interesting challenge for us to operate. But we didn't obviously want people to have to go and change all of those. But the other reason is you do get this little bit of extra flexibility with the classic type. Like with a threshold, you are putting numeric thresholds really that you're aligning to. With the classic type, it's a little easier to set up thresholds that are calculated from data. So here's just an example here where the threshold is not like greater than 10. The threshold is greater than what was the 95th percentile of my data over the past 30 minutes. Trying to look for, is this thing trending worse compared to what it did in the past? Hopefully that makes sense, and we will see both of these types as we get into the UI. I wanted to start just by showing kind of how alerting works in general. This is sort of a dummy little example. I wouldn't worry about the query too much, but like I did with John's request yesterday, I will include all today's links in Slack as well. And if you want to play with it, it's kind of cool trick. It's basically making the data go bad over the last 5 minutes, so we can just see how alerting would work over something like this. So we have this trend that's been pretty flat over time, and now suddenly it's spiking up. And quite likely you might want to alert over something like this. And I will just do a very simple example to give you the idea of it. But if I put something like the data is greater than 200, which it certainly seems to be once it goes bad, you'll see that this changes the chart from the original data to just a Boolean. So I'm saying greater than 200, it shows me 0 when that condition is not true, and it shows me 1 when that condition is true. In terms of setting up alerts, you obviously can do that under the alert page. I'll show that shortly. But I find for my own use, I mostly work at it this way. Like I see data in a chart or a dashboard that looks anomalous, looks interesting, or I know that, hey, we had some kind of an issue yesterday. I want to set up an alert to catch that issue in future. I don't want to be scrambling next time. So I'll come into a chart like this, I'll play around with the data, I'll find an alert condition that captures what I'm interested in, and then I'll actually create the alert from here. So I click the little 3 ellipses thing on the right-hand side of the chart, and I just say, I want to create an alert from this. And this takes me into the alert creation dialog, but with my query that I had already pre-populated for me. You'll also notice that in the chart that I had several different query lines. If I was working off this from a dashboard, there might be a whole bunch of dashboard variables set in the query and all that stuff. When you create the alert from the chart, it'll just do the text replacement of all that stuff for you and just bring the full condition over. That makes it easy to create alerts even from complex expressions that you have. What you will see here is I see the data I had previously. This is what we're looking at in the chart, and it's the same query, of course. But one thing that is different is we actually see this little, I'm actually maybe make it severe. I might highlight it a bit more. We're seeing this event overlaid on the data as well. This is how events display in Wavefront. They're either, they always have these little dots at the bottom of the axes. They can be instantaneous events, in which case you just get like a single bar coming up from the dot, or they can be events that have a duration, which is what you're seeing here. A pretty neat thing about alerting in Wavefront is that when you have alerts defined in the system, whenever one of them fires, it will automatically create an event for the duration of that alert firing. It will also automatically associate the event that it's creating with the sources, which could be one or could be many, that were causing the alert to fire. We'll see this in a little more detail later, but what that generally means is if you're looking at dashboards or you're looking at charts, you'll generally just see relevant alert events to the data that you're querying overlaid on those charts for you automatically. It's configurable actually, so if it's getting in your way, you can switch it off. But it can be pretty helpful and it's pretty nicely automated. What this is doing, by the way, is back testing. So you can see if this was an existing alert that I was editing and that alert had actually previously fired, I could split between looking at the events from actual real firings versus testing the alert and seeing when it would fire based on the condition that I've set up. The nice thing about this back testing is that I get to really see, does this alert work or not with some real data. In a lot of systems, you pretty much have to define some alerts. You then just have to see how they really work. Like you just set it up, you run it for a week or two, and you just find out in practice, was it too noisy? Did it catch too many things? Or did it miss real events? In this case, if you had the scenario, like I said, oh, this incident happened yesterday, we didn't catch it quickly enough, we want to set up an alert to catch it next time, you can define your alert, you can see whether it would have caught yesterday's event, and you can also see whether it would not have caught a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to trigger for, which is pretty good. One thing I will mention, and normally this is just going to work, and it does work almost all the time, but this is, if you will, simulating what the alert engine would do and saying that the alert would fire at this time. It is not exactly the same as what the alert engine does, though. For example, the thing that mostly would throw this off is, say in reality, your alert, the data that your alert is looking at is always delayed by 5 minutes, and say that just because you're aggregating that data in some way in your pipeline, and you're sending it to Wavefront with a 5-minute delay. This can certainly happen a lot with the CloudWatch data, by the way. Like the data that you get from AWS CloudWatch is not always that timely, so you might have some delays in it. If you set up an alert and you to look at that data, and you say, for instance, I want this alert to fire if the condition is true for 3 minutes, but the data that you're sending to it is always 5 minutes delayed, then the alerting engine will always see no data. In its 3-minute window, there never is data because the data is 2 minutes older than that at any given time. However, if you were to look at that data here with backtesting and you're looking at it historically when all the data has arrived, the backtesting would happily say, sure, that alert will fire on this condition based on the data that it's seeing. But in reality, the alert engine wouldn't see that data in real time. So hopefully that makes sense. I kind of touched on it as I was describing how the backtesting works, but the general concept here is you define a condition and you're specifying for how many minutes do you want that condition to be true for before you fire the alert. Normally you don't want to just trigger off one event. The CPU spikes up to 95 for 1 second and then it comes back down. Who cares? You probably don't want to be alerted by that. And that's why you're setting minutes here. This is particularly important with Wavefront, I would say, in that a lot of times when people are alerting with Wavefront, they're not there. They are doing some kind of calculation on the data, like we were looking at summing the rates of a whole bunch of systems just before. It's usually the case that when you are aggregating data across many different systems, those systems are all reporting their data at infrequent intervals, not well aligned with each other. And therefore, if you do try to alert off a single true value, it could well be the case that some of the systems that are involved in that query are just sending their data a few seconds behind the others. And if you just waited a few seconds, you would see that the alert condition is actually not holding true. And so it's safer to look at it this from a minute standpoint. If you do want, though, like it maybe doesn't make sense for this example, but just to give you the idea, if you do want to alert off a single value, like this error condition is so bad that even if it happens only once and once only, I still want to fire for it, you can just put something like this in here. Like, I want to know what was the max value or the minimum if it was a low number that causes the problem. I want to know what was the max value of this thing over 3 minutes. That means that if it even happened once in that 3-minute window, we would catch it. Or indeed, you could say then, in this case, trigger after 1 minute, which would give you the fastest possible firing for when it detects that condition. You can optionally, there's 2 minutes here. There is how long should the condition be holding for before the alert fires, and how long should the condition not be holding for, be the reverse, until the alert resolves itself. If you do not check this, these default to 1 and the same. We do obviously allow these to be different. You may want to set up an alert like, I want to be fairly conservative about when I start firing, but I want to resolve it quickly when I know that it's resolved. I don't want to keep alerts open for any longer than necessary. Perfectly valid to do so, but I would just say from my own use of alerting and from working with a lot of customers with alerts, things are just a little clearer and a little more obvious, I would say, when these match. So unless you have a real good reason why you want them to be different for a particular alert, I would just tend to leave this at the default where both of these numbers are matching one another. The display expression allows you to control what is going to be sent to either the system or in most cases the human that's going to receive this alert notification. So when these alerts fire, Wavefront is going to, I shouldn't have had my moving max on there. When these alerts fire, Wavefront's going to create an alert or an event, sorry, for the duration of the alert firing, as we said. And it's also going to notify something, or could notify several different things, in fact. One of the things that the notification will send out is a link to Wavefront itself, where the user can click that link and go and see what's going on in Wavefront with that data. Normally, you don't want to see when you receive that link, especially at 3 a.m. when you got paged and you got woken up. You don't really care to see the 0 or 1. You're more interested in what did the actual underlying data look like? What's really going on here? How has this data changed? So it's very common, therefore, that the display expression is just the condition, but without the Boolean part of it. It doesn't have to be, though. If you know that certain metrics are highly correlated with one another, then the display expression could actually be all of those metrics, even though not all of them were included in the alert condition. So you're totally open to make the display expression whatever makes sense for your case, but it is pretty common to be like this. Condition has a threshold, display expression is the same thing minus the threshold. We're looking here at, oh, go ahead, is there a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could draw a line where the threshold sits.
You can with the threshold alerts. So you could, even here, if you wanted to, you could collect them, and this should do it. So yeah, that has drawn the line. But that is exactly how the threshold alerts work, just automatically. They do that for you. I'm going to just go through the various options that you can set here, and we'll look at threshold alerts too, and you'll see how that works there. But that's an interesting question. I guess even with the classic, you can do it in this way. Also tying to the threshold style of alerts, the severity in this case is just one and only one option. With the big difference with threshold-based alerts is you can have different severities with different thresholds, right? Additional information is just free-form text. Actually, an improvement that I'd like to see here is it'd be great if this could pull in information from Wavefront that you could populate dynamically as the alert is fired. It is currently just free-form text. It doesn't do any text replacement of the kind of like what you can do with dashboard variables and things like that. But it still can be pretty helpful. This will also be sent to the user who receives the alert notification, or users. This can be links to runbooks, to how to fix this problem. This can be descriptions of certain links to Wavefront dashboards that would be useful to help troubleshoot the issue, all kinds of stuff. You're then going to set one or more targets of where this alert is going to go to. At its most simple, you can just put a list of email addresses here. I'm going to struggle with Chrome autofilling stuff, but there we go. I've got my email onto this alert now. Also, you can put PagerDuty API keys directly. I guess email and PagerDuty are just the two sort of really pre-built things that you can target. Alert targets, which we will look at a little later in this session. This is how you can set up webhooks to point at anything. I want to send the thing to Slack. I want to send it to ServiceNow. I want it to trigger a Jenkins job to take some automated remediation action. Like when this alert fires, I don't even need a human to look at it. This job can just kick off and fix the thing. You can have multiple of any of these, so you don't have to send it to just one endpoint, and that all works pretty well. Let's just look at how this changes then with thresholds. Most of the concepts are exactly the same. It's just that instead of having a separate condition and display expression. Here now the condition really is the display expression. This is the actual data, right? You still have the same concepts of how many minutes was this thing happening for before I want it to fire. But now I get to set different thresholds for different severities. So let's see, based on this data, maybe I can have a warning at 100 and severe at 300. And now do you see, Scott, per your question, in this style of alert, you just get these lines drawn for you automatically. You don't have to do anything. The same is true for when alerts of this style trigger, and you get a link to Wavefront to look at what caused this alert to trigger. These lines of the thresholds are also just automatically drawn for you in that link that you receive. And like I said, since we introduced this idea of threshold-based alerts, I have noticed that for most newer customers, they are, in a lot of cases, just using these threshold ones off the bat for most of their alerting. Like I said, we've left Classic here, both for backwards compatibility, and also it has a little flexibility that thresholds don't have for cases where you might need it. In the case of a threshold, you are setting, do you want it to be greater than, less than, pretty simple. The other one difference, actually, with Classic and Threshold is with the threshold-based alerts, you're always going to use an alert target. You notice here that it's telling me add target. It's not even giving me the option of adding an email. Now, don't worry, you can still email with this. Alert targets themselves can be set up to point at emails. Actually, that's the better way to do it, frankly, because with an alert target for emails, you can define multiple emails that target is going to go to. You can modify that list over time as people get added and removed from groups without having to go in and edit each and every individual alert. So you can edit it one place in the alert target. Also with alert target emails, you can even customize the email contents. You don't have to use whatever is the Wavefront default one. But that is a difference. So here, when you're using these, you would set up a target first and then attach the target to your alert. Hopefully that makes sense. Then finally, alerts have tags as well. You actually will see there's a lot of shared concepts between dashboards and alerts in terms of how you manage them, just like how you can put tags on dashboards to categorize them by team or service or whatever makes sense in your organization. You can do the exact same thing on alerts to categorize them by teams and whatnot, just to make it easier for folks to find the alerts that they care about the most. There are a few additional settings here under advanced. These are less frequently used. That's why we put them under advanced, but I'll just mention what they do while we're looking at it. Typically, alerts check every 1 minute. So you set up this condition, you say, I want this to fire. In this case, it's saying if it was true for 5 minutes, and that thing will be evaluated by Wavefront every minute. And if it has been true for the past 5 minutes, it'll fire. Sometimes you might have alerts that really don't need to be checked every minute. Like say you're doing an alert that you're looking at what's the weekly moving average of new user signups to Cloud Health, or something of this nature. That kind of data is not really changing on a minute-by-minute basis. And also because you're looking at a week, or maybe even looking at a longer time period than a week, the query itself is crunching a huge amount of data. So this is frankly helping the Wavefront backend. If you have very computationally intensive alerts that are slow to run, that don't even necessarily make sense to check every minute, it helps us out and it helps the system out in general to increase the the checking interval of those to a level that makes sense. Like maybe in the case of weekly moving average of how many users are signing up to Cloud Health, maybe you just check that once an hour or something like that. Evaluation strategy this is a really brand new thing. Generally, Wavefront is ignoring like say an alert checks at 30 seconds past the minute. Normally, it is ignoring that last 30 seconds worth of data, and it's looking at the minute prior to that, so that it has, and then either 1 minute or X minutes of data, depending on how you'd set up your alert minutes, 5 minutes in this example. It does that for reasons I already described. Like if you're summing up the rates of total requests processed or error requests that came in divided by total requests, and you're aggregating that data across hundreds or thousands of time series, if you're just looking within the last 30 seconds, it may just be the case that not all the data has arrived yet, and you could make an incorrect decision. You could make a choice to fire the alert based on the data that you're seeing, but if you just waited a few more seconds, more of the data is going to arrive, and you will see that the alert does not hold. However, sometimes you have just these things that if this error happens one time and one time only, we want to catch it as soon as it really is possible to catch. And that's what this real-time alerting checkbox is for. It's kind of like in a car, it's like turning off the anti-lock brake system. Like we're generally trying to do our best to avoid misfires, but if you know exactly what you're doing, you can disable some of those sanity checks that we're doing. Hopefully that makes sense. I have seen this one used fairly infrequently because, so the idea just here is normally when a Wavefront alert triggers, it's going to notify the targets that the alert is set up to hit once. If you wish to, you can make Wavefront resend that notification every X minutes. I have not seen this used all that often, just because normally for alerts that people would care to resend notifications for, they're generally sending them to a tool like PagerDuty or a tool of that ilk in the first place. And then that tool is the thing that is responsible for escalating the alert if it had not been acted yet, and things of that nature, versus Wavefront resending the notification. But it's there if you want to use it. And then the final option here, and kind of, I said these are less frequently used, so we put them under advanced. If my memory serves, we literally added this option for one customer, although it's an interesting use case. If you remember from yesterday, we talked about how if you're looking at data and you're looking at it from more than 4 weeks ago, and that data has not reported any new values in the past 4 weeks, the Wavefront system is going to consider it as obsolete. It's not going to remove the data, but you will need to, on a chart, you'll have to have this include obsolete metrics option turned on to see that data that's older than 4 weeks. Not necessary to do that if the data is still reporting currently, only if it stopped reporting. The reason we added this same concept onto the alert definition was a customer was doing alerts where they were calculating what is their normal behavior by considering normal to be what's the average value for each time period over each of the past 5 weeks. So say like, I think it was something like, just total incoming requests to their system of something or something of that nature. And it would be, the way that they define normal was normal at 12 p.m. on a Monday is what is the average of last Monday 12 p.m., 2 Mondays back 12 p.m., 3, 4, 5. And then that would just go roll forward through the day. Normal at 1 p.m. is the average of normal of that time from each of the past 5 weeks. And because their time series and their systems were ephemeral, just like Cloud Health, their servers and so on were refreshing on a daily or weekly basis, some of the 5-week-old data was obsolete. And that's why we have this, so that if you have cases like that where your alert condition actually is looking at data older than 4 weeks, you may need to use this. It's like I said, it's rare that you have alerts that are looking at data or calculating what they're going to do from data that old, but it's here if you need it. That makes sense? Does anyone have any questions there?
Yeah, Connor, I have a question about the resend.
Yes.
Does it just keep resending at that frequency until it gets delivered, or does it ever give up?
So yeah, it's not actually it does. To your exact question, it just keeps resending at that frequency. It's not actually about delivery in this sense, in that Wavefront is not. Does Cloud Health use PagerDuty, or do you?
We do.
Yeah. So Wavefront is not PagerDuty, and it's not trying to do all the functionality that PagerDuty does. In that, whenever Wavefront sends a notification, there is no concept in Wavefront of did the person act that, or
I get that part.
So the resending is literally just resending. It's got no connection to did it successfully send. You know what I mean?
In the past, we've had webhooks to a ticketing system.
Yes.
And our ticketing system was less reliable than something like PagerDuty. And so, with Datadog, we needed to work with them to do this resend thing. So I was glad that you had it. In fact, I was about to ask that question. But obviously, if we're sending to some service like PagerDuty, it's pretty high nines of availability. But if we were to hook it up to something homegrown that might not have that level of availability, this would be cool to know about.
Yeah, and I have seen it. It's a very good point. Even with PagerDuty, I have seen very occasionally that it doesn't work. And we do not. It is an interesting thing. We actually, as far as I know, we don't have a kind of retry mechanism built in here, except for this feature of resending on an interval. And obviously the most unreliable thing is email. Even email is not bad. Obviously, it mostly works. But if you're sending thousands of emails about thousands of alerts over days, some of them probably will not arrive.
Do we have any visibility into that?
Not on your side. So Wavefront does provide quite a bit of visibility into what it's doing in terms of those metrics that begin with tilde. And on one of the days, we looked at this out-of-the-box Wavefront usage dashboard that's graphing a lot of those tilde metrics. We don't expose that data in the form of tilde metrics to end customers, but we do have data for that on our side. Wavefront is itself using Wavefront, and we have a whole heap of telemetry about our own systems. So if you ever do have like something weird going on like that, certainly reach out to us, and we can look into it and help you figure out what's going on.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to show, so I actually set up an alert earlier. I could have done this completely live, but I didn't want to be like searching through my email on the recording. So I just captured a screenshot. This is an example of what the default email notification looks like. So earlier this morning, the same alert, I just saved it and it fired, and I got this email to show the alert fired. This is where I'm saying, if you want to, in an alert target, you can actually configure the contents of this email, but this is what it looks like by default. You get an image of the alert, this kind of goes along with the link to Wavefront. So if you click the view alert link at the bottom, you're going to see this data in Wavefront itself. But the image is just to help you, like, you got paged at 3 a.m., you're not on your laptop yet, you can just see the image on your phone of, is this something I really need to get up for, or can I leave this for a while? You're going to see the condition of the alert, all the dates of when it happened and so on. What are the series or sources that are causing the alert to fire? And here's where you get that additional information that I mentioned, where you can, in the alert definition, you can put some hopefully helpful information to the user who receives this alert in terms of what they should do. And then, of course, jump into Wavefront to see what's going on. I also showed, just because this came up with a customer recently, so I just thought, okay, I'll highlight this. Whenever there's a concept in Wavefront of snoozing alerts, which I'll show in a second. What I did this morning was I set up this little alert just to fire so that I could show you this example of what the notification looks like. And afterwards, I just snoozed the alert. I could have deleted it, but I snoozed it. And I got a notification that the alert was snoozed in my email. When you set up alert targets, they're actually pretty configurable in terms of what status changes on the alert do I care about, what do I want this target to receive, and you can optionally set that up that I don't want to receive the snoozed notifications on this alert target. If you're just doing a classic alert and you're using email, then the email does receive the snoozed notification. And I highlight it only because right around Thanksgiving, not too long back, a customer got a bit irked because they intentionally snoozed a whole bunch of alerts. They did so because they did not want to notify people over the holiday if those alerts happened to fire. They were not critical ones for the holiday. But then the users did receive all the snooze notifications anyway. So the user was a bit irked that their attempt to not notify people backfired. Okay, let's see what we should show next.
Just a quick question, even though I think I know the answer to it. Is there a construct in here for changing the severity of alert based off of how long it's been it's fired? In other words, same value at 5 minutes is a warning, and at 10 minutes is a severe.
That's a really interesting question. I would have to play with it. So not in a super point and click way,
Yeah.
or not in a point and click way at all.
Classic ones, right? You'd make 2 thresholds.
Yes, I think you could do it with 2 alerts, certainly, like you just said. Yeah, that's a good idea. That would work. There might even be a way, although I'd want to go away and play around with it, there may even be a way of calculating the duration with a Wavefront query and then lining that up with the thresholds. But yeah, what you said is probably the easiest kind of out of the box way, with two alerts with different minutes and different severities.
Cool, thanks.
Another concept here is that of maintenance windows. I didn't highlight it exactly in the context of alerting, but there was an example we looked at on day 2 of how you, in the Wavefront query language, you can calculate what time of day it is or what day of the week it is. And we use that for calculating the weekly average of something, but just for the business hours. If you wish to, those kind of conditions can be in an alert as well. So you could have in here, like, I'm not going to repeat it all again, but you can have in here things like, I only want this alert to fire if it's happening between 9 and 5, or if it's the opposite, I want to be alerted if this is happening outside of business hours and whatnot. And that's a way that you can kind of define time-based conditions on your alert that is just baked in and always going to be the case. Maintenance windows is more the concept, the usual concept. I know that I'm going to be doing some maintenance on these systems next Wednesday from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Maybe 3 p.m. is the plan at least, and I can preemptively set up a maintenance window in Wavefront to suppress alerts for the systems that I'm going to be working on during that work. Just like everything else in Wavefront, although you can do this, set these up on the UI, this is just calling an API under the covers. So you could hook this concept up to your automated workflows for working with systems so that maintenance windows will be created just as the work begins. This is what Wavefront does itself, actually. So we use tools like Terraform in how we and others, Ansible and others, in how we manage our own infrastructure. I imagine that Cloud Health probably has similar tools, or even if not exactly the same ones. And we create maintenance windows as work happens so that we don't get false pages for stuff that we know is being worked on. It's pretty simple how to set them up. You give them the time range that they're going to work over. You can extend them if you create one thinking that your maintenance window is going to be 3 hours, but actually it takes longer than you thought. You can update the maintenance window so that you have more time. You can specify which alerts you want the maintenance window to affect, and you do that by alert tags. So that's kind of like doing a maintenance of the whole alert itself, but you can also do maintenance within an alert for specific sources that are part of that alert. I guess I didn't actually explicitly say this, but was perhaps clear anyway. When you set up an alert in Wavefront, you're not, if you have 1,000 machines and you want to know if the CPU is greater than 90, you don't need to make 1,000 alerts for that. You're generally going to make one alert that looks at all 1,000 time series at once and will alert you if any of those time series are firing. So in such a scheme, this is the way that if you have such an alert and you know that I'm going to be doing the maintenance on the ones that are tagged this way, then this will avoid those machines from triggering the alert, while the alert itself is still running and still detecting issues with the other machines that are not related to the maintenance you're doing. Hopefully that makes sense. And you have flexibility here in anding and oring things. Any questions about that? Do you do things like this today? Like I guess Datadog may have a similar concept. I don't know if this is
yeah, we do.
Expect to use. Yeah.
We use Chef and Terraform to set it up.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. This is the alerts page itself. Like I said, alerts and dashboards kind of at their core have a lot of similar concepts. So this is pretty similar to the dashboard browser that we looked at yesterday, except looking at alerts. Actually, let me go over to Cloud Health for this, because I did see you actually have an impressive number of alerts already. So when I navigate to the alerts page, it's going to show me at the top of the list any alerts which are currently firing. Also, it will show just this little icon at all times of how many alerts are currently firing. These ones are all warning events. That's why they have this kind of yellowy or orange kind of color. If there were different alerts of different severities firing, we'd actually see the different numbers here color-coded by severity of the alert, but in this case, they're all warning ones. You can filter and search by a bunch of things here. These are the ones, like I said, in the firing state. This is actually an interesting concept. So there are 264 alerts here that are in a state called no data. All this means is that in the last window that this alert looked at, it saw no data whatsoever. And when you set up alert targets, you can choose whether you want to be notified of the no data condition or not. It's not exactly the same as the alert firing. It's just highlighting that there is nothing here. Sometimes that's something you want to be notified about. Sometimes it isn't. The concept is, say I have an alert. I'll just use the same simple example. I have an alert set up over these 1,000 machines that's going to notify me if any of them are above 90 CPU usage. If something really catastrophic happens and I'm literally seeing no data for those 1,000 machines, then the alert can't fire because it can't tell whether they're above 90 or not, but it can go into the no data state and inform you of that. Hopefully that makes sense. These are the ones that are checking but not currently active. These are the snoozed ones. Actually, just while we're talking about snoozed, I'll show you how you would do that. Snooze is just a quick concept of, it's not quite the same as a maintenance window. Maintenance window is a preemptive, I know ahead of time I'm going to be doing work. Snoozed is just like, this alert is firing, I'm going to get to it later. I just want it to stop for right now. And they're very easy to snooze by different options. Even just snooze the thing forever, which is what I did earlier this morning on my little demo alert.
Is it snoozing it just for that one host or for everything?
No, that's a great question. It snoozes the whole alert. I would love, one of my own sort of pet peeve features, I would love to be able to snooze for that one source, or snooze for the environment equals development, but leave the environment equals production. We don't currently have that. There is a feature request open for it. I myself might even have filed it because I want that feature myself. But yes, right now it's just I'm snoozing this whole alert.
Yeah, we'll snooze it in Datadog.
In Datadog, it lets you do that.
I'm sorry, we'll snooze it in PagerDuty if that's what you
Yeah, but does it, like, is that a Datadog feature that you can snooze it in Datadog for just specific hosts?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe you can choose which one you want to do, or whether you want to basically snooze the whole alert or just for that.
Yeah. Makes sense. It'd be good to do that. Just like, or let's finish. In maintenance, I'll just finish these lists. In maintenance, self-explanatory. We don't have any maintenance windows set up here, so there aren't any in here, but if you did, you'd see them here. Invalid doesn't happen all that often, but invalid alerts are ones where, like, the query has a syntax error, or what could show up in here occasionally is if you have an alert that has a very complex query associated with it, or that is looking at a huge amount of data, and so that the Wavefront system cannot execute that query, it will show up as invalid. Some other similar concepts here between dashboards and alerts. Alerts also have versions, so you can also see who made what changes when to an alert and revert back to those changes or clone them off if you need to. You can also assign access control to alerts. I mentioned this yesterday. I have seen this used more for alerts than dashboards, frankly. Most people are okay with anybody can edit any dashboard, and even if someone does make a bad edit, you have the version history there, so you can revert it back pretty quickly and easily. But I've seen more commonly with alerts, like maybe I might have hundreds of alerts and individual users creating them, but I might have like my 50 or 100 alerts that are really critical to running the business, and I may want to lock those ones down so that only certain groups or certain users can edit them, just in case. And you can see the same concept of tag paths like you get in dashboards, where if you put dots in your tag name, you can make hierarchies of them. And in this way, you can kind of make a team hierarchy or a service hierarchy to help people find the ones that they're looking for. I think I may not have actually mentioned this with dashboards, but by the way, when you delete things, whether it be a dashboard or an alert, they do not get fully deleted automatically. They will get soft deleted initially, and same thing on dashboards. So I can actually look at the deleted ones. Deleted alerts or deleted dashboards will stay in here for 30 days, and then they'll just get automatically aged out of the trash after 30 days. But if you make a mistake and you deleted something by accident, it's easy to just look at the deleted ones and restore them back.
What is orphaned?
Orphaned is if, this has happened to me a few times now, where the usual Wavefront timeout for a session is a week, but the timeout for a login session for an admin action is, I think, just 1 hour or something like that. So several times it's happened during the training. If I clicked something that was an admin action, I had to re-auth. Orphaned is if you are using the concept of access control, and this is also common to dashboards too. So if you're using the concept of access control on either alerts or dashboards, and if someone locked an alert down or a dashboard down to where, say, they were the only individual that could access it, and then they are no longer in the system because they changed company or whatever, then it becomes an orphan. According to the rules, no one has access to this thing any longer. There is a concept of super admin in the system. I believe that right now this is just I've set this to be Scott. I didn't reach out to you about this yet, Scott, but we should just chat who should be the super admins, just in case this ever comes up. We can put a reasonable list in there, and super admins can add other super admins, so you can manage that over time. You don't have any of these right now, and if you never use the ACL features, you never will have any, but that's what the concept is there for.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we talked about alert targets quite a bit, and actually, may not really, looks like I don't need to do much training on alert targets because I can see that you guys have made a bunch already, so you obviously get the concept. But just for completeness sake, we'll show how these work. You define them here, and then you can use them from within your alerts. So if I just go in and create some dummy alert, I'm not going to save it, not even going to define a condition, but what kind of names did you have in there? Like no alerts in 24 hours. So if I wanted this alert to go to that thing, I can just start typing my alert target name and it'll show up here. You can see that the targets can have different, the targets themselves can target different things. Like webhook is your catch-all, I want to post some content to an endpoint. And you can set up a webhook to do that. Email and PagerDuty, hopefully self-explanatory. This is when I go into the create alert target definition. This is where I was saying with alert targets, you have a little bit more flexibility than you do with, say, just the out-of-the-box email. Like if I set up an alert and I just send it to several emails, then it is going to, if that alert is snoozed, the email is going to receive the snooze notification. That's just kind of built into the system. But with alert, if I set up an alert target and I associate the emails with the alert target, then that's under my control at that point. I can choose which of these statuses I want the alert target to receive. Just while we're here, I guess I didn't mention this, but just sort of out of interest, or it could be useful to know. Again, in Wavefront, you're often or generally going to be having alerts that are looking at multiple time series in one alert. The way that the alert transitions, or the alert will transition through its states, is while it's not, you first set up the alert, it's going to enter the checking state, and it's going to check that by default every 1 minute, as we saw. If one of the series starts meeting the condition, the alert will transition to the firing state, and that is this trigger. If the only one series meets the condition and it stops meeting the condition, the alert would enter the resolved state, and it would go back to checking, and that is what this trigger will give you. If, however, during that firing, I have one series that's meeting the condition and the alert starts firing, then I have other series that start meeting the condition, I will receive the alert status updated notification. So this is kind of within the life cycle of this one alert. I now have multiple different series that are meeting the condition, and that I may get this notification multiple times through the life of the alert firing. And then finally, once they have all stopped, that's when the overall alert would resolve. Hopefully that makes sense. When you are setting up these alert targets, I just look at the generic one so you see all the options. We use a templating language called Mustache for doing this. So you can basically have full control over what you want this content to be, and the tweaking of that is via Mustache. It's not I don't know if any of you have used it before, it's not a Wavefront specific thing, it's just a templating language that we happen to use. This is the one that I see people using the most, I guess, just generic webhook, and you have pretty good control over what you want the content to be when you post this to the target, including custom headers. This is the mechanism by which we've done things like if we want to trigger a Jenkins job to fix something, we can, when this alert fires, just kick off this kind of nurse job to fix the problem. You can put like authentication tokens for Jenkins or other systems as custom headers and things of that nature. With the email ones, you have the choice of, do you want it to be an HTML email or just plain text? But same concept, you're defining exactly what you want the body to be using this Mustache template language.
Hey, Connor, quick question on the last one you just showed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if the Terraform provider supports that already? Because we definitely have a lot of stuff where it'd be very easy just to kick off a Jenkins job and parameterize that from Terraform.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay.
Remind me to, if I don't send it, remind me to send a link. The Terraform integration is interesting in of itself in that
right.
I bet we haven't updated it yet here. Let me just double check. So the Terraform provider was originally created by by Space8 Games, and yes, I see we have not updated this yet. We use Terraform ourselves, actually. Wavefront uses it, and obviously it's become very popular in general. So we have decided, and Space8 was happy, Space8 wants us to do this. We've decided to take over that provider, and it may take some time to get it into the official, I forget what Terraform calls their plugin concept.
The registry?
Yeah. Okay, registry, good. So
yeah.
It may take us some time to get it into the registry and whatnot, but that's our goal, to make this more of an official Terraform thing. We already do have a release candidate that you can use and that I would suggest you do use instead of this one, because although we're still working on it, we've already fixed a lot of bugs that are in this one. So you
Right.
might as well start using what we've got.
Okay,
And
we can take that one offline after.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
And also, as we're all part of VMware, I can even point you at the engineer who's working on it. So, and he's open to feedback and suggestions and so on. So, yeah.
Sweet.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's look through here then. These are just sort of screenshots to have for your reference. We looked at that stuff. So the rest of the alerting section, I would say I'm going to share some details, some nuances, some gotchas. Frankly, it's kind of a two-edged sword in terms of including content like this in the training, I think, in that most of the time you do not need to worry about these level of detail. And certainly by going into this level of detail, the intent is not to like scare you off or make you not want to use alerts or anything like that. But I do include it here because probably the most common question that we get, the Wavefront CS team from our customers is why did this alert fire? It looks like it shouldn't have, or indeed the opposite. Why did this alert should have fired? Why didn't it? And so there are some subtleties to how this works that in certain cases it's good to know about them, but most of the time you don't have to worry. It just kind of does the right thing and works as you'd think. But the content here may be useful, not necessarily to remember 100% of it, but if you do ever have a weird alert firing or something, refer back to here. It might trigger your thought process of what's going on, and also just reach out to us if you want help with it. We're happy to look into those kind of things. A lot of this I will have covered already in just kind of how alerts work. So maybe let me just see the things that we did not cover. One is this. So alerts are checked. I said alerts are generally checked once per minute. This is a little bit of like, I guess, opening the dirty laundry of Wavefront. But this may not happen exactly every minute, every time. Like I mentioned that we have a customer that has something like on the order of 50,000 alerts. That customer is also ingesting on the order of 2 million data points per second into the system, and they're querying out on the order of 20 million data points per second out of the system. But it's a pretty heavy load. And if we're trying to check all 50,000 alerts every 1 minute, but you can imagine, say, some user kicks off some really expensive query servers get overloaded on the system temporarily. Maybe the alerts don't get checked exactly once a minute in that case. So it can sometimes cause strangeness. And actually, I have an example of showing a case where that happened in the upcoming slides. This is a key one. This is one maybe that actually is good to remember as you're thinking about your alerting. You know how when you set up your alert, you say, how many minutes do I want this thing to be true for before it fires? In order for Wavefront to make that simple, what it does is when it evaluates an alert condition, it always aligns it to 1 minute. So if your alert minutes is 5, Wavefront is going to take your alert condition, it's going to align it to 1 minute, and then the alert condition will have, or the alert engine will have exactly 5 points, which are 5 minutes worth of data to evaluate against the true or falseness of the alert. This usually only matters if your data is being reported more frequently than a minute, which actually, at least for currently, that is true of a lot of Cloud Health data. And it can be controlled by you in your alert condition. So if you put an explicit align, like align 1 minute by the minimum or align 1 minute by the maximum in your alert condition, you are controlling exactly what the alert engine is going to see. It's probably good to know as well what is truth and falsehood in Wavefront. The only false value is 0. Non-zero values are true. So it is possible for something like 0.25 to cause an alert to fire because it is not 0 and therefore it is treated as true. That's good to know. Most of the time when you do alerts, you have like greater than or less than. So you are converting it to a Boolean, but this also means that you don't have to have that. The alert could just be looking for data, and if it sees non-zero data, it'll fire. The other key concept here in this statement, is that missing data is considered as neither true or false. It's literally null. So the statement of when does an alert fire is an alert fires when there's at least one true value and no false values within the time window being checked. And again, the only false value is an actual explicit 0. The absence of data is not false. So if I had this alert, which was had a 5-minute alert window, and let's say it was just for one time series that I'm looking at, and let's say in 1 minute it had a true value, and then maybe like it crashed, like it was the CPU is greater than 90, it happened, got a value of 1, and maybe the system crashed or something like that. So for the next 4 minutes, there was no data. The alert will fire in that case because it saw at least one true value and no false or 0 values within that 5-minute window being checked. I think this does make a lot of sense as a default behavior, but like everything else in Wavefront, you can control that if you wish. So if you don't want that alert to fire in that case that I just described, you can use something like default the data to 0 if it is missing in your alert condition. Then in that case, the alert is going to see the one true value, but then it's going to see multiple 0 values that your query has inputted into the time series, and it will not fire. So everything's configurable, but that is to be aware that the default behavior. And then resolving is kind of the opposite. When there are no true values within the evaluated time window, the alert will resolve. Does that make sense? Any questions about any of those?
Nope.
Maintenance windows we covered. Alert targets we covered. Okay, again, couple of kind of very interesting examples. Again, most of the time you're not going to run into something like this, but as I said, one of the common kind of questions we get from customers is like, why did this alert fire or why did this alert not fire? So we've definitely seen some interesting examples over time. And I've got just 2 examples here of kind of tricky things that happened and the explanation of why exactly they happened. So here's an alert. The idea is we're looking to see if this query, we're adding up some data here, and we're saying if it's 0, then that's true, and we may want the alert to fire. The query under the covers that is being added up here has data every 15 seconds. So there's maybe a little hint there that this aligning the data to 1 minute that the alert engine does may come into play because we have 4 data points in every minute. The alert fires if the condition is true for 60 minutes. And actually the alert resolving for 2 minutes is irrelevant in this case. So should this alert fire? Any takers? Or will this alert fire, maybe we should say.
I don't think so. Because like it resolves if it's false for 2 minutes, right? Oh, it's a tough one.
Well, the condition is not true for 60 minutes. But you're probably going to tell me that it does fire.
Yes. And also myself, like, I agree. What you just said, I agree with it entirely. I look at this data and I say, no, it's not going to fire. It says the condition is true for 60 minutes, and while it is true at times, it does not seem to be true for 60 minutes. So I would say, no, it's not going to fire. In this case, though, it actually did fire. And it goes back to that aligning thing. So remember, implicitly, Wavefront is always going to align your data to a minute before it evaluates the condition. And that's just so that it has nicely, the alert condition here was, in this case, over 60 minutes. And so this allows Wavefront to have 60 data points to evaluate against over that 60-minute window. And likewise, in an alert with 5-minute window, it's going to have 5-minutely data points with which to examine. In this case, the data was being emitted every 15 seconds. So within each minute, and I should also say by default, and this is the way that Wavefront's doing it, aligning is just aligning the average to the minute. So what Wavefront was actually seeing was each minute was the average value of the 4 data points that existed within that minute. And within each minute, there was at least one of those data points which did meet the condition. And therefore, when you averaged it out, the condition across the 60 minutes never actually reached 0. The lowest it reached was 0.25, like 1 out of the 4 points in the 4 that were reported within a minute. And therefore, because 0 is false and non-zero values are true, 0.25 meets the condition, even though it's not exactly 1, and therefore the alert fired. Did that make sense, why it happened?
Yeah.
Again, so I'm repeating myself, I guess. I'm almost hesitating to show you this stuff because you don't normally need to care. Like normally just it's not that the query that the user had was bad. The way they originally defined their alert, it probably will work most of the time. But if you do get weirdness or you really want to think it through, the way to solve this is if the alert condition had said itself, align 1 minute, min, the original condition, that would mean that if in any given minute any of the values were false, the overall data point that the Wavefront alerting engine saw would have been 0. And in that case, the alert would not have fired. And even if you do that, so if you had the query written, align 1m, comma, min, comma, sum, blah, 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 when Wavefront's evaluating it, it will still apply this align implicitly around your condition. It's just that in that case, what Wavefront aligns it to is going to match your original condition 100% anyway. So the Wavefront alignment is not going to change the data. So that's what the way that this user could have solved it. Assuming, of course, that the user did not want the alert to fire, which I think when we look at the original data, certainly looks that way. You would certainly look at this and think, yeah, the alert should not fire in this case. But this is where this stuff is frankly subtle and complicated sometimes, because it is true that in every single minute, there was at least one data point that was meeting the condition, and that did remain true for a whole 60 minutes. So maybe this actually is correct, and maybe you did want to catch this thing that was happening, and maybe this really is a real problem that you wanted to investigate. That's the kind of subtlety to this stuff where Wavefront can't know that. It can't know what your real intent or goal with this alert is, but it does give you the tools if you wish to get into the real nitty-gritty details of it to make yourself be extremely explicit about what the behavior is that you want to have. Okay, here's just one more of these sort of interesting cases. So this was a case where the goal of this alert is to trigger an alert when there is any 5xx error, like one and only one. And I would say, by the way, it's great if you're running into weird alert things like this and you want help, please do reach out. We're happy to help with it. If you can give us the kind of human readable goal of what you're really trying to make the alert do, that can be really helpful in terms of thinking how to best model that. And in this case, the goal is trigger an alert whenever there is any 5xx. So even a single one, we want it to trigger. The query was like this. The alert condition is if it's true for 5 minutes, fire. It looks like in this case, the data does not report anything if the error didn't happen. So it could be sometimes that the way you're emitting the data to Wavefront could report 0, 0, 0, 0 like every minute, and then if the thing happens, like the 5xx in this case, you get 1 reported. That's not how it was in this case. This was a thing where if there is no data being reported, or if the error doesn't happen, no data is reported, and then if it happens, we get a point. So what we're seeing here is that there was 1 true data point here. And then I'll throw this one open for any takers as well. Should this one fire?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Because you said it would have to be false in that 5 minutes, but null is not false.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right. So we had, at this point in time, and let's say actually like say the alert's being checked every minute, and at the 7:04 minute, it's going to see that there was 1 true, and then it is going to see the 5 minutes prior, exactly like you're saying, the 7:02, 7:01, they're all null, so it should have 1 true value, and it should fire. Here's where this one is really tricky, though. So yes, I think that logically this should have fired, and the reasoning that the person gave on the phone is correct. It didn't fire, and this is one where, frankly, this was, again, we're kind of airing dirty laundry here in a way. This was a bit of a Wavefront glitch in a sense that caused this to not fire. So Wavefront is aiming to, I've said this before, Wavefront is aiming to check each alert every minute. It is not trying to check each alert on the minute precisely. The alerting engine is spreading the alert query load out across the minute. Again, I mentioned we have some customers with many thousands of alerts. If we try and run every single one at the exact same second, exactly aligned to the minute, we're not going to have a good time. Instead, we are trying to check each alert once a minute, but one alert might be getting checked at 7:03 and 10 seconds, and the next one's getting checked at 7:03 and 45 seconds, and they're aligned like that. A really subtle thing happened in this case, where the alert was actually only checked every 70 seconds instead of every 60. And by a strange twist of fate, that caused it to not fire, even though it probably should have. So we actually went and really debugged this to see exactly what happened. And exactly what happened was that right here at 7:03 and 55, the alert checked. But remember I said that in order to avoid kind of, data that's not all the way there yet, and false firings because of that, whenever an alert checks, we're going to ignore the data within the last minute and look at what was the last full minute's worth of data. So when it checked at 7:03 and 55, it did not see this false value because that came up within that current minute of being checked. Then it did not check again until just past the 7:05 minute. And in this case, it then saw both the one true from back in this minute, but it also saw the false from the 7:05 minute because the check happened just afterwards and it did not fire. So I think depending on your personality perhaps, I think it's kind of interesting that stuff like this can happen. Most of the time it's not going to come up. Most of the time it just works and works as you expect. But hopefully interesting and helpful to understand how these kind of weird glitches can happen from time to time. And again, although this was frankly, this was a Wavefront issue really that caused it in this case, you can make your queries robust against these kind of issues in that if the query had included high pass in it, then the data that Wavefront sees would not have included the zero values at all. Wavefront would then only be seeing the times when the error did occur, and it would not be seeing the times when the error did not occur. In this case, the only data point that existed would be this one value that happened within the 7:03 minute, and then the alert would have fired when it was checked at 7:05 and 5 seconds passed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and did you also say there was a way though to force it to not wait, look back past a minute?
Yes, under the advanced settings, there is an option for doing that.
Okay.
I would advise, generally, again, I think I'd use the analogy of it's turning off the ABS in your car.
Yeah. You wouldn't recommend doing it that way?
I wouldn't recommend doing it unless you really are sure. And actually, though, this case might be a case where you would want that kind of logic, because the original goal here was one and only one error I want to fire as soon as possible. And it is true that in this case, the ABS actually made things worse. I'm not enough of a car person to know if there's an analogy in the car world where, most of the time ABS is helping you, but in very subtle situations, it actually is worse than not having it. But yeah, I think most of the time you want it that way, but it did lead to the weird glitch in this case.
Now, was this checking every 70 seconds because somebody had set that frequency, or is just the nature of the system not keeping up?
Yeah, just the nature of the system not keeping up. Okay. So that's the other thing, is that even with the normal ABS-like logic, if the alert had been checked every 60 seconds, as it should have been, or even if it had been checked, maybe I'll screw up the math here, but every 64 seconds or something, or 65, if it had been checked every 65 seconds and it had been on the 7:05:00 or whatever, or no, it would have to been 1 second before that. So yeah, if it had been checked every 64 seconds, it would have been okay too. But because it was beyond that, it messed up.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. We've got about 30 minutes left. Okay. Events in Wavefront are pretty, oh, sorry, just to check. Any more questions about that, or does that make sense? All right. Events in Wavefront are pretty straightforward. We've seen examples of them already. One just big caveat that I would just throw out is, although Wavefront does support events, and they can be pretty useful actually, overlay, when you did a code deploy, or like we saw, alert events where the system will automatically create events for the duration of alerts firing for you. Quite useful to see that kind of data overlaid with your time series. But the caveat I'll mention is that Wavefront's eventing engine is not super high scale in the way that its metrics engine is. So we talk about you can ingest millions of metric data points per second if you wish to. But with events, it's a soft limit, and we can increase it a little bit if needed. But I think like the default soft limit on event creation is create 1 every 10 seconds. So obviously 1 every 10 seconds is a completely different order of magnitude from millions every single second. So hopefully that just gives you an idea of where we kind of expect events to be used in Wavefront. So they are useful, but it's not an event tool. It is a metrics tool. Obviously, that's a little bit different with tracing. Like the tracing backend in Wavefront is not the same thing as what we're using for events. But obviously, with tracing, you are sending a bunch of individual request IDs and such. But that's a whole different thing. There are 3 types of events. The system and alert ones just kind of happen, but it's good to be aware that they exist. System events are things like, when you delete a dashboard, it'll create a little system event that dashboard was deleted. Whenever you create an alert or you snooze an alert, there'll be a little system event that those things occurred. The alert ones are what we've seen already. When alerts fire, the alert events are created. User ones are the ones that you make. And these are the ones that I'm saying by default has a soft limit of 1 of these every 10 seconds. These you can create on the UI, like I showed yesterday, or most typically the way I've seen this done is just via API call. So you hook it up to your build system and you send an event whenever you're deploying a new version or something like that. The system and alert events are just kind of read-only in the system. You can see them, but you can't remove them. User events, you can delete them if you need to. And actually, let me show an example of this. But by default, you're going to see events on your charts that relate to your sources. Let's have a look at that. I should have an example set up here. Yeah. So this is I just noticed this morning as I was looking through some of the Cloud Health data. So it's just like a random example, but I'm looking at some data here. It happens to be looking at the uptime of all of your sources, or maybe not all of your sources, but all the sources that meet this thing, and it's looking at the max uptime of those sources. I can see, I haven't got any kind of events query here, but I can see that an alert fired for one of the sources within this query at a certain point in time along the axis here. The way this is happening is by default under the Format tab of your charts, there's a little checkbox display source events, and it's defaulted to on. And all it's doing is, if you're looking at data and the system sees that there were alert events associated with the source or sources that your query is looking at over the duration of your chart, then it will highlight them here. And I can kind of show how this works in that if I pin this and grab it seems like this alert was firing for this particular source. If I filter this query and say, I'm not interested in this one source, and if I don't screw it up, What did I screw up there? Oh, I see. I think I copied too much from the... So now that I've filtered that one source out, that automatic alert event is no longer being displayed because there's no alerts for any of the sources that I'm looking at in this time window. Make sense? Hopefully pretty straightforward. And just to show you, and it's just a random example, but just to get the idea, whenever you have these alert events overlaid on your chart, you can view the alert link that was associated with that. Remember when an alert fires, it sends you, one of the things that the notification provides is a link into Wavefront for the duration of that alert firing. This is that link. As well as in the alert notification itself, you can always get back to it later by looking at the alert event and drilling from there to the alert link for that thing. Events can also be viewed with queries. There's actually a pretty robust events query language. I'm only going to show a tiny amount of detail of it, but you can do pretty interesting manipulations of events with the event language. Of course, you can refer to the doc for more detail. But here, I've just looked for any events that are of type alert where the severity was info. And again, it's just a sort of random example, but just to show you, this is looking over the last week, there were some of these going on. And I can filter I can use my events queries to display those. If you are ingesting your own events, like if you did want to ingest stuff like we're rolling a new version, then you might well put something like, when you programmatically create that event, you may give it a type like type equals deploy. And then on your charts, you could have these events queries. It's also possible on a dashboard level to have that events query controlled for the whole dashboard so that you don't have to have the same query on each and every chart. And just to give you a bit of a sense of like, you can do more manipulation of events if you wish to. If I drill in here, you can see how this one has this event has a duration. I can convert this to time series if I want. Like I can wrap my events query in the ongoing function or wrap it with the ongoing function. And this will show how many matching events were occurring over time. And so you can see this turned the event data into time series data. We do get the question fairly often, can I alert over event data? And you sure can. This is the way you could do it. You could send events in, you could use ongoing to see how many of them are happening, and then you could have alert conditions to fire over those things. Why did that one not work? There we go. And the answer is yes, you can do those things. But again, going back to that caveat of, although Wavefront does support events, it's more tuned for being a metric system. So the recommendation is, if it's possible for you to get the data into time series format, it's probably going to work a lot better. But if you really need to, you can do alerting over events as well, like this. Hopefully that makes sense. Or any questions about that?
Can I assume the retention period on events is the same as metrics?
Yes. In fact, you know what? It is probably even longer, funnily enough, okay. In that we have a process in place which is removing time series data older than 25 months, which didn't always exist. You know, at the beginning of the Wavefront company, we were just keeping all the data. There was no process to delete the older data. Over time, and some of our customers have been customers for 6-7 years, so we added that process to delete after 25 months. Just off the top of my head, I'm not sure that we've actually done the same for events. So the event persistence may actually be indefinite at this point. not 100% sure on that, but yeah.
Thanks.
So we kind of looked at this. All right, we're at the end. I do have, so we have about 20 minutes left. There were a few things that were not covered in this training. I mean, I think that over the 4 days, we've covered most concepts in Wavefront, but there's a few things we didn't show, and I thought it might be helpful just to touch on them briefly. That way you'll have kind of everything. I guess actually on events itself, I didn't show this. You can go into browse events. So this is the way, what we looked at already is how you see events on your charts. This is how you can search for events just in general. The thing that I have used this for mostly is for searching for those system events, like a dashboard. I can't find the dashboard that I'm looking for. Did someone delete it? I can come in here and try and find the dashboard deletion event associated with that. So I haven't used this much, I have to say, but when I have used it, it's for those kind of purposes. Some of the other things then that we didn't look at yet are, and which I'll show briefly.
Quick
Concept of, or go ahead, yeah, question?
Just quick question.
Yeah.
Is leading an event an administrative action?
It's a permission. So
okay.
Remember, I'm not going to click it just in case it locked me out again. But yeah, there's a permission for event management. And the way that Cloud Health has set this up so far, which I actually see a lot of customers doing similar. The idea is just let users have a lot of control. But all Cloud Health users have pretty much all permissions. So anyone in Cloud Health will be able to do this. And one thing that is not here yet is you saw how dashboards and alerts have ACLs if you wish to use them. So,
yep.
But events do not. So there is not the concept of fine-grained permissions on events. You either have the permission, in which case you can add and remove events, or you don't. There's no like, I can edit this team's events, but not these other team's events.
If I'm going off on a tangent, I know, but for like a compliance use case, could you guys tell us that I deleted an event?
No, not currently. There are some things that we have like kind of audit logs for, but not for that.
Okay.
At least not currently. We do, that kind of request does come up from time to time though. So yeah, makes sense as an idea.
Thanks.
Okay, probably the two main things we didn't look at all were derived metrics and external links. So I'll just touch briefly on what each of those are. And for a couple of these, I have a little quick demo, which is hopefully pretty interesting. Derived metrics is the concept. I've seen this in other systems with various different names, but it's the idea of running a query continuously to output the results of that query to a new metric. So say you're setting up a dashboard, and that dashboard has to aggregate across 10,000 time series to produce some total answer, like total errors across all these series or whatever it happens to be. And could be a fairly expensive calculation, and it could mean that when users are loading that dashboard, the chart's not loading up particularly fast. Or it could be the case that maybe if you look at the data in a 2-hour window, that it is reasonably fast, but that oftentimes with that dashboard, it's something that you would want to look at over days or weeks time windows. And when you open the time window that wide, it's not a particularly fast query. That's the kind of thing that derived metrics are really useful for. You can define the query here, and you can write the results out to a new metric. And then the dashboard, or even the alert, could be used for alerting too, is going to read from the derived metric, and then it will be super fast. Because instead of it querying 10,000 time series and aggregating them all, it's just going to read the one and only one time series that is, quote unquote, the answer. Does it make sense as a concept? Hopefully, yes. It's very similar to alerts. You know how alerts had this idea of alert minutes and also the frequency at which you want to execute them. The idea here is you're running your query over, say, the prior 5 minutes. You are executing the query every 1 minute. That does mean that there's going to be some overlap here, like the same data is going to be seen by the query as it's running each minute. But it's just giving the system a chance to write the correct answer. Like if you run the query at minute 12 p.m. for the prior 5 minutes, and some of the data within the prior 5 minutes is delayed and it hasn't arrived yet, it just means that when you next run the minute, you'll be able to correct some of that data. That also implies, by the way, you can overwrite data in Wavefront. If you send the exact same data with same timestamp, same source, same metric, same tags and values with a different value, the last value that you send will overwrite. It'll be sort of last value in. The one kind of tricky thing about this, not tricky, but just to be aware of, I guess, is say I'm doing this, like say my thing is sum the load average from all these machines, and this is going to be my derived metric. I need to tell the system what do I want to name it. Like I can't write this answer back to the original metric, sample CPU, because I'll be overriding the original data, which I don't want to do. So when you are using derived metrics, you're going to use the metadata functions to name the data what you want. So here I'm using the function to name a metric, and I'm just explicitly saying I want to name this metric CPU load total. Then if I were to save this and wait a minute for it to start executing, I would start seeing this metric called CPU load total appearing in Wavefront, and I could use that in my charts and my alerts and so on. So hopefully that makes sense. And alias metric, by the way, it can extract, like you can name things by extracting pieces of it, as we saw with Tagify. It works in a very similar way. But it has optional arguments that let you get more specific with it. But if you just put one argument, it just is literally the name. Like this is what I want to call it. The other one I wanted to show you, or the other main one, is external links.
This is just one question on this one before we jump out of it. So would you use this one to calculate, say, free disk space, right? If there's no metric that's going to that, would you create a query that did some mathematical computation on it and then save that back as a value?
Yes, that would be a good use case, yeah. You can, yeah, I mean, obviously it's up to you. The simple examples that we looked at in this training of calculating free disk space, the number of time series weren't a whole lot anyway, so the queries were fast. And in that sense, maybe there's no point doing a derived metric. But even in that case, if a user is to look at the dashboard, and if they drill into the query behind the dashboard, maybe it just looks a little more complicated to them what's going on. They see this math going on to calculate something. Whereas if you quote unquote hid the math behind the derived metric, the user's opening their dashboard, they decide to drill into the chart, and they just see, oh, it's graphing TS free disk. Like, cool, I get it. I don't have to kind of inspect the query or try and figure out what it's doing. I can just see from the metric name what it is.
Okay, thanks.
External links is the idea of being able to link from Wavefront into other tools. So we looked at yesterday that Wavefront has the ability to drill in within Wavefront, and that's the concept of going from one Wavefront dashboard to another. like I'm looking at a cluster view and I want to drill into one of the hosts within that cluster or something to that effect. External links is I want to link from Wavefront to another tool. I guess that you probably have a logging tool, Splunk or Elk or something. Do you use something like that?
For our microservices, we're using Log Intelligence.
Okay, yeah. So that's the kind of tools that we've seen people using this capability for, like linking from Wavefront to some other tool, like a logging tool. I'll show a quick example, and then I'll show how you kind of set these things up. Looking at some Kubernetes data here, and in this case, it's set up to work with a logging vendor called Scalar, but same kind of concept would apply for Log Intelligence or other tools. And hopefully no one in VMware will mind that I'm using Scalar here instead of its own Log Intelligence tool. But I'm right-clicking on one of the things in the list, and I'm going to the external links menu, and I can see that I can look at, for this thing, either node logs or pod logs for the thing that I'm looking at in Scalar. And hopefully I'm still logged in here and it will take me through. I think actually it may not have done the exact right flip to the right search, but you get the idea. I'm able to move across here. The way these get set up is under external links. I can see all the ones that are there. If I look at the Scalar pod one, what you're defining here is what data do I want this to work on? Like obviously, say in your case, you're using Log Intelligence for your microservices. So there is some subset of your data within Wavefront that it would make sense to be able to link to Log Intelligence for. But there's a lot of other data in Wavefront that Log Intelligence doesn't have in it anyway. So there's no point giving that right-click context to link to Log Intelligence if it doesn't make sense for that data. So you can do that filtering based on the metric name, the source name, or in this case, it's based on what tags are on the data. So if the data has a cluster tag set to corrupt, and it has a point name tag, which is of any value, then this right-click context is going to appear for that data. And this is defining how do I link to that data in Scalar, and it's extracting pieces of the Wavefront chart to pass over into that Scalar search so that I can link directly from Wavefront to the same thing in Scalar or Log Intelligence without having to recreate my search in Scalar or Log Intelligence from scratch. It hopefully makes sense. Any questions about that? And then I had one more little sort of Easter egg to show. This training was very much focused on the kind of traditional metrics capabilities of Wavefront. We touched very briefly on tracing on Monday. The other thing that Wavefront has built into it is histograms. Histograms are a way of really accurately tracking. A lot of times it's going to be latency data across applications. You're familiar with dog_stats_d, so you're probably familiar with how latency data is going to be reported as a bunch of scalar percentiles. Like if you have 10 machines, each running dog_stats_d, and they're all tracking, say, a latency, for each of the 10 machines, you're going to see what was the P95 latency of them. Works quite well a lot of the time, but the problem is you can't really combine a percentile of a percentile. So you can't tell what is the percentile across all of those 10 machines in an accurate way because you've lost the original samples. Wavefront histograms allow you to do that kind of thing. Wavefront's actually keeping the distribution data in its back end, meaning that you can tell accurately what is your percentile, like your P95 response time across your fleet, which is pretty nice. An example, just to show you on your data of that, is you are using tracing. Tracing automatically creates some histograms from the data that it sees from the traces. And I see that in this case, we have like a service tag on here. So if I wanted to, I can say, merge all this distribution data together by the service tag, and then I can calculate the 95th percentile of that data. So I've got here an accurate picture of the 95th percentile of all the traces and operations happening under each of these services. The Easter egg part of this that I wanted to show is, now this is not coming in the next release. I showed yesterday a couple of new chart types which are coming like very imminently. This chart type is a little further off. It's, I think, the release after. So hopefully you're going to see this on the Cloud Health cluster in a month or so. But we are putting a histogram visualization into the product. So the example I just showed you is I want to see a specific percentile from my histogram data, which ultimately converts it to a traditional looking time series. Coming pretty soon, you'll also be able to look at actual histogram data like this style in an actual histogram visualization, which I'm looking forward to. And with that, certainly we covered some topics in more detail than others, but we've really looked at almost every feature that there is in Wavefront.
For more information, detailed videos, and blogs about all Aria Suite products, please visit apps-cloudmanagement.techzone.vmware.com or simply scan the QR code to learn more.